My name is Renee Kaplan, and the day my boss rejected my emergency leave request was the day I finally understood how quickly loyalty can become invisible. I was standing in the narrow corridor outside the operations office at Northbridge Retail Solutions, my phone still warm in my hand. The hospital had called twice within 10 minutes. My father's condition had worsened suddenly, and the doctor's voice carried that careful urgency that meant time was no longer flexible. "I need a few days," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My dad is critically ill. I'm his only family, Lucius Carter, my department director." Didn't look up. His eyes stayed fixed on his screen, fingers tapping keys as if nothing in the world had interrupted him. "We're heading into quarter end," he said. "Everyone's stretched thin." I paused, thinking maybe he hadn't truly heard me. He might not make it. I added. That's when Lucius finally raised his head. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even annoyed. It was distant. "Renee," he said evenly, "personal emergencies can't disrupt operational flow. If you leave now, don't assume your position will still be here." The sentence landed cleanly, controlled, as if it had been practiced. I had given Northbridge nearly 8 years, built internal reporting systems no one else could maintain, trained supervisors who now approved my evaluations, missed holidays, answered emails at midnight, took pride in being reliable. And now, when my father was fighting for his life, I was being told to choose. So I did. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I nodded once, turned around, and walked out of the building. 2 hours later, I was sitting beside my father's hospital bed, holding his hand while machines filled the room with quiet mechanical breaths. He looked at me, tired, lucid, and whispered, "You did the right thing." He passed away early the next morning. The days after blurred into paperwork, arrangements, and silence. Grief doesn't arrive loudly, it settles. When I returned to Northbridge a week later, it wasn't to ask for my job back. It was because something felt unfinished. That's when I noticed the man waiting near the lobby. He wasn't an employee, he wasn't a client, and when he said my name, he also said my father's. If this moment hit close to home, I hope you're doing okay right now, truly. Before the story goes on, write down one thing that's been weighing on you today. Just seeing it on paper can lighten the load more than you expect. Where are you listening from? I'd love to know. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing so you don't have to face the next chapter alone, because what happens next changes everything. I noticed him the moment I stepped into the lobby. Northbridge hadn't changed. Same polished floors, same muted lighting designed to make everyone feel smaller. Same reception desk where people pretended not to see you unless you mattered. But the man standing near the windows didn't belong there. He wore a dark suit that didn't wrinkle when he moved. No briefcase, no badge. He wasn't checking his phone or glancing at the clock. He was watching not the building, not the people, me. I slowed my steps. He turned as if he'd been waiting for that exact moment. "Renee Kaplan," he said calmly. Hearing my name from a stranger's mouth still felt intrusive. I nodded once. Cautious. "My name is Adrian Lowell," he continued. "I was hoping we could talk. I should have asked who he was. I should have said I was busy, instead. I asked the only question that mattered. How do you know my name?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes shifted briefly toward the elevator bank toward the executive floors. "I worked with your father," he said. The words landed heavier than I expected. "My father didn't work here." I replied. "He was retired." Adrian's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, like he'd just confirmed something. He wasn't retired. He said quietly, "He was careful." I felt a strange pressure build behind my ribs. "Let's step outside," he added. "There are ears in this building that don't belong to either of us." Outside. The city noise wrapped around us: traffic, footsteps, the hum of people moving on with their lives. Adrian leaned against a concrete column, hands visible, deliberate. "Your father was a senior risk analyst," he said. Not officially, not publicly. He consulted on internal compliance failures for companies that didn't want those failures documented. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. He worked from home. He barely talked about work. That was the point. Adrian replied. The quieter he was, the safer he stayed. My mind jumped to my father's notebooks, the coded spreadsheets, the locked folders he never explained. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because his last assignment was Northbridge. The name hung between us. They flagged irregularities. Adrian continued. Revenue smoothing, internal cost transfers, deferred liabilities disguised as operational losses. Your father was brought in to map it quietly. And I asked. Adrian's gaze hardened. And 2 weeks before his health collapsed, he stopped submitting reports. A chill ran through me. He believed something was about to surface. Adrian said, something big enough to put people in prison. He didn't trust digital channels anymore. Everything he found. He locked behind analog failsafes. He paused, studying my face. You were his contingency. The city seemed to fade. I don't know what you think I have, I said slowly. But I'm just an employee they were ready to discard. Adrian nodded once. That's exactly why no one's watching you, he said. Yet. Inside the building. I could see movement near the executive elevators. Lucius Carter's floor. Adrian straightened. You need to decide something, he said. Because Northbridge hasn't noticed what they lost. Not yet. That night. I didn't turn on the lights when I entered my father's apartment. I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't ready to see it fully, yet the chair still pushed back from his desk. The half-finished mug by the sink. The quiet that no longer waited for him to fill it. I set my keys down and stood there for a long moment. Listening. The place smelled the same. Old paper, coffee, a faint trace of antiseptic from the home nurse's visits. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed secrets. And yet, after what Adrian had said, everything felt rearranged. I went straight to his study. My father's desk was exactly as he'd left it, tidy, but dense. Stacks of notebooks with no titles, pens arranged by color, a mechanical pencil he never let anyone borrow. On the wall above the desk hung a small corkboard I'd seen 1,000 times and never really looked at. Receipts, transit cards, a torn grocery list, and dates. At first, they looked random, but when I leaned closer, my chest tightened. They weren't random at all. Each date matched a moment I remembered the year he switched doctors, the month he insisted we change internet providers, the week he told me to back up my files just in case. I opened one of the notebooks. Numbers filled the pages, not calculations patterns, columns that repeated, then diverged, symbols that weren't shorthand, but markers. I recognized the structure immediately. Risk mapping. I'd built similar frameworks at Northbridge, just cleaner, more sanitized. My father's were raw, human, designed to be followed, not admired. I kept turning pages. Between 2 sections, a folded envelope slipped free and landed on the desk. My name was written on the front, not hurried, not emotional, just precise. Inside was a single line, handwritten. If you're reading this, it means they pushed too hard. My throat closed. Beneath the note was a small metal key taped to a card. On the back, 3 words were written, storage, not digital. I searched the apartment for over an hour before I noticed what I'd never noticed before: the floorboard beneath the bookshelf in the hall. One corner didn't sit flush. The storage unit was small, hidden, heavy. Inside were folders. Not many, just enough. Each labeled with a company name. Northbridge Retail Solutions sat at the top. My hands shook as I opened it. Internal flow diagrams, margin discrepancies, email transcripts printed and annotated. A timeline that ended abruptly 2 weeks before my father collapsed. At the bottom of the folder was a single page. A contingency plan. Step 1 was underlined. Do not confront them directly. I sat back on the floor. Folder open in my lap. Adrian had been right. I wasn't just my father's daughter. I was his exit strategy. And for the first time since Lucius Carter told me, my emergency wasn't the company's problem. I understood something with absolute clarity. Walking away from Northbridge hadn't made me powerless. It had made me invisible. Observant viewers will notice something unusual here. What about you? I went back to Northbridge 3 days later. Not because anyone had called me. Not because I needed closure. I went back because I needed to see how a system behaves when it thinks a weak link has been removed. The lobby recognized me before the people did. The security scanner still accepted my badge. No deactivation notice. No system lockout. That alone told me more than any conversation could have. Northbridge didn't move fast. It buried problems under process. At the reception desk, a junior assistant looked up, hesitated, then smiled politely. "Are you visiting?" she asked. "I'm just picking something up," I said. She nodded without checking. On the operations floor, everything was exactly the same. Screens glowed. Conversations stayed low. People avoided eye contact the way they always did when something uncomfortable had happened, and no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. A few colleagues noticed me. Their expressions flickered surprise, sympathy, relief that it wasn't them. No one stopped me. Lucius Carter's office door was closed. His calendar light was red. I didn't go in. Instead, I walked past the analytics bay and paused where I used to sit. My desk was already cleared, not reassigned erased, as if I'd never been there. That was fine. I wasn't here for my job. I was here for data, at the printer station. I pretended to check a queue and glanced at the output tray. Financial summaries, internal memos, a quarterly variance report printed twice by mistake. I recognized the formatting immediately. They were still using my framework, not the updated version, not the compliant one, the old one, the one I'd warned them about 6 months ago. I felt something tighten behind my ribs, not anger, not grief. Confirmation. I pulled out my phone and took a photo. No alarms, no interruptions, near the conference rooms. I overheard 2 managers talking in low voices. Audit window got shifted again. Legal said not to flag it internally, as long as it stays below threshold. Finance won't escalate. Threshold. My father had circled that word in red ink. Twice. I stepped into an empty meeting room and closed the door, just long enough to breathe in the quiet, to ground myself. Then I opened the folder on my phone. Northbridge, Section 3. Contingency Layer 1. Observe first. Let them confirm the lie. They were doing exactly what he predicted. I left 10 minutes later. Unnoticed. Outside. The city felt louder than usual. My phone buzzed as I crossed the street. A message from an unknown number. Adrian. They just requested a regulatory extension. That means they're nervous. I looked back at the glass facade of Northbridge Retail Solutions. They thought they'd already won. They had no idea the game hadn't even started. I didn't touch the files that night. That was the hardest part. Every instinct told me to act to expose, to confront, to force a reaction. But my father's handwriting echoed in my head. Steady and unyielding. Speed reveals intention. Patience reveals truth. So instead, I made a single phone call, not to regulators, not to lawyers. To Northbridge's compliance intake portal, I submitted a request for clarification. No accusations, no documents attached. Just 3 neutral questions about internal revenue allocation procedures and deferred cost recognition phrased the way an external auditor might ask them without suspicion. I used a generic email, a residential IP. It took me less than 12 minutes. Then I waited. The response didn't come that day, or the next, but on the 3rd morning. Adrian texted me. Adrian. They froze non-essential approvals. Finance flagged process uncertainty. I smiled for the first time in weeks. At Northbridge, uncertainty was poison. They ran on predictability, on unchallenged assumptions, on the belief that complexity itself was a shield. I checked my phone again. An internal memo had been forwarded to the wrong distribution list, someone panicking, someone sloppy. It mentioned a temporary pause on data transfers between departments. That meant someone had gone digging and found something that didn't line up. I spent the rest of the day at my father's apartment, cross-referencing his notes with what I knew Northbridge still used. His timelines weren't just records, they were forecasts. He'd anticipated where pressure would crack first. Late afternoon. Another message from Adrian. Adrian Lucius Carter requested an emergency legal consult. I closed my eyes. Lucius didn't panic publicly. He escalated quietly, which meant the lie was starting to cost him sleep. That evening, I did something else my father had planned for. I mailed a single physical envelope, no return address, no signature. Inside was one printed chart, anonymized. Incomplete. Undeniable. It showed a discrepancy just large enough to trigger internal review, but too small to explain away as error. I knew exactly who would receive it, and exactly how long it would take before the question reached the executive floor. When my phone buzzed near midnight, I didn't need to read the message to know what it said. Northbridge had begun auditing itself. I hadn't accused them of anything. I hadn't revealed what I had. I'd simply reminded them that someone was watching, and that was enough. There's a quiet detail hiding in this moment. Did it register with you? Northbridge didn't respond with transparency. It responded with control. 2 days after the internal audit began, Adrian called me before I even had time to open my laptop. They're tightening access, he said. Pulling permissions, locking shared drives. Quietly. That told me everything. People who believe they're innocent don't start hiding. They explain. They document. They defend. People who are guilty restrict. By noon, former colleagues started texting me cautiously, indirectly. Do you know what's going on? They're asking strange questions. Finance is reviewing projects that were closed years ago. Lucius Carter had chosen his strategy. Instead of fixing the problem, he was looking for a person to blame. That afternoon, an internal announcement circulated. Temporary restructuring of analytics oversight due to compliance review. I read it twice. Restructuring meant one thing at Northbridge: consolidation of power. Lucius was pulling reporting lines back under himself, which was exactly what my father had predicted. When pressure rises, his note said, they centralize. That's when patterns surface. Adrian confirmed it an hour later. Lucius personally requested archived performance models. He said, the ones you built. I leaned back in my chair. He wasn't trying to find the leak. He was trying to understand me. That was his mistake. Late that night, I opened the contingency folder again. Section 5, Behavioral Trigger Matrix. My father had mapped executive reactions like weather systems, denial, consolidation, aggression. Lucius had moved from denial to consolidation faster than expected, which meant the next phase would be retaliation. Sure enough, the next morning, my phone lit up with an unknown corporate number. I let it ring. They left a voicemail. Renee, Lucius said. Voice controlled but tight. We need to discuss some unresolved matters related to your departure. Please return my call. Unresolved matters. I deleted the message without responding. An hour later, Adrian sent another update. They're reviewing your employment file, retroactively. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. Lucius wasn't trying to protect the company. He was trying to protect himself. And by pulling my records, by reopening old reviews, by trying to establish a narrative, he was leaving fingerprints everywhere. That afternoon, I did nothing. No emails, no calls, no moves. I let Northbridge burn energy chasing a ghost, because the moment they decided I was the threat, they stopped looking for the truth. And when powerful people stop looking at facts, they start making mistakes. Big ones. The mistake arrived on a Wednesday morning. Not through a leak, not through a whistleblower, through arrogance. Adrian forwarded me the file with a single line of text. This just landed in the wrong inbox. It was an internal email chain marked confidential, executive only. Lucius Carter had meant to send it to 3 people. He sent it to 37. The subject line alone told the story. Managing exposure without escalation, I opened it slowly. Lucius's tone was calm, measured, managerial. He outlined a temporary interpretation adjustment for revenue classification, advising finance to delay documentation alignment until external pressure stabilizes. In plain language, hide it until they stop asking. One line was highlighted by the accidental recipient before it reached Adrian. Do not create new records. Rely on legacy models. Legacy models? Mine. The email didn't just confirm misconduct, it confirmed intent. I closed my eyes and let the moment settle. My father had written about this exact scenario. They will always incriminate themselves when they believe the audience is small. Adrian called 5 minutes later. This changes the posture, he said. Intent removes ambiguity. I know, I replied. But we don't move yet. He paused. Why not? Because now they're scared, I said. And scared people overcorrect. That afternoon, Northbridge issued another internal notice, this one rushed. Sloppy. A freeze on all external communications. Mandatory legal routing for internal questions. Immediate revocation of access for former personnel with proprietary knowledge. Former personnel? Me. Lucius was sealing doors that didn't need sealing, and every seal left a mark. By evening, I had 3 separate confirmations that the email chain had been saved, forwarded, and quietly archived by people who didn't trust what they were being asked to ignore. No one wanted to be the one holding the secret when it exploded. That night, I took out my father's folder again and added a single page. Printed email, header intact, timestamp untouched. I labeled it carefully. Trigger point achieved. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel something close to calm. Not victory, not satisfaction, certainty. Lucius Carter had crossed from defensiveness into obstruction, and that wasn't a gray area. That was a line. The next move wouldn't be quiet. It would be irreversible. I didn't send the email. That was the point. Instead, I changed who would ask the next question and when. At 8:30 a.m., an independent compliance consultancy filed a routine inquiry with Northbridge's legal intake. Nothing dramatic, no accusations, just a request to verify whether certain revenue classifications aligned with updated guidance. It wasn't anonymous. It wasn't hostile. It was procedural, and it landed on Lucius Carter's desk like a weight he couldn't lift. By 10:15, Adrian confirmed the reaction. They're scrambling, he said. Legal pulled finance into an emergency review. The phrase material exposure just showed up. Material exposure meant the clock had started. Northbridge could no longer stall internally. The question now had a timestamp outside their walls. I spent the morning doing something deceptively ordinary, organizing my father's notes into a clean index. He'd left breadcrumbs, but I needed a map. Each section aligned with a decision tree what to release, when to release it, and to whom. The contingency plan wasn't about revenge. It was about sequence. Never reveal everything at once. He'd written, control the pace, let them outrun themselves. At 11:40, Lucius made his second mistake. He authorized a partial disclosure. Adrian sent me the draft. They acknowledged classification discrepancies while denying systemic intent. They offered cooperation without committing to scope, a classic half-step designed to look transparent while buying time. But it did something else. It admitted the problem existed. That was enough. At 1:20, the consultancy escalated automatically, mechanically, to request supporting documentation, the very records Lucius had told his team not to create. Silence followed. By late afternoon, Northbridge's internal chat channels went quiet. No jokes, no status updates. People were being told to route everything through legal, which meant nothing moved. Systems don't like bottlenecks. They strain. They leak. At 6 p.m., my phone vibrated with a new message from an unfamiliar address. Lucius Carter Renee. We need to speak, privately, tonight. I stared at the message for a long moment. This wasn't negotiation. It wasn't reconciliation. It was containment. I typed nothing. Instead, I forwarded the message to Adrian with a single line. He's behind the curve. When I finally put my phone down, the city outside my window was glowing offices lit late by people who thought staying longer might change outcomes. It never does. Northbridge had spent years controlling narratives internally. Now the timeline belonged to someone else. And once you lose the clock, you lose everything. I agreed to meet Lucius Carter at 7:30 p.m. Not at Northbridge. Not anywhere that belonged to him. He chose a quiet restaurant by the river, the kind executives use when they want privacy without appearing secretive. Neutral ground. Controlled lighting. No witnesses who mattered. Lucius arrived early. I knew that before I saw him. People who believe they still have leverage always do. He stood when I approached, smoothing his jacket, offering a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Renee," he said, "thank you for coming." I sat down without returning the greeting. For the first few minutes, he spoke in abstractions: market volatility, regulatory noise, how leadership meant making difficult decisions under pressure. He was warming the air, hoping I'd breathe it in. Then he leaned forward. "There's been some confusion lately," he said carefully. "External questions, internal anxiety. I think we can address this discreetly." Discreetly. The word hung between us like a habit he couldn't break. "I'm listening," I said. Relief flickered across his face, brief. "But real. We're prepared to revisit the terms of your departure," he continued. "A revised severance, consulting compensation, strong confidentiality protections, a clean conclusion." I met his eyes. "You already gave me a clean conclusion," I said. "You just didn't realize it at the time." His smile tightened. "This doesn't need to escalate," he said. "Northbridge prefers resolution over confrontation." "No," I replied. "Northbridge prefers control. Resolution is what happens when control fails." That landed. Lucius's jaw flexed. Just once. I reached into my bag and placed a single sheet of paper on the table, face down. Not dramatically. Casually. Like a bookmark. "I'm not here to threaten you," I said. "I don't need to." He didn't touch the paper. "You stopped asking who my father was," I continued, and started asking what he left behind. "That tells me exactly where you are in this process." Lucius exhaled slowly. "You don't understand how complex this is," he said. "There are people involved. Consequences. I understand complexity." I replied. "I built systems to manage it. My father dismantled systems that abused it." Silence stretched. The river outside reflected city lights steady, indifferent, finally. He asked the question he'd been circling all evening. "What do you want, Renee?" I smiled then, not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, but with clarity. "I want you to stop trying to outrun the truth," I said. "Because every time you do, you leave evidence behind." He glanced at the paper again. Still didn't turn it over. "If this becomes public," he said quietly, "people get hurt. People were already hurt." I replied, "That's why this exists." I stood. Lucius didn't. As I walked away, my phone vibrated once. "Adrian, they've escalated to external counsel, and federal interest just became formal." I didn't look back. Lucius Carter thought the meeting was his last chance to negotiate. He was wrong. It was simply the moment he confirmed to himself that the story was no longer his to manage. Northbridge didn't collapse in a single headline. It unraveled the way systems do when truth finally enters them quietly, procedurally, without mercy. The first notice came from regulators requesting expanded documentation, then another, broader, and more specific. Legal counsel multiplied, calendars filled with meetings no one felt prepared for. Departments stopped speaking to each other. People started documenting conversations that had once lived safely in hallways. Lucius Carter resigned on a Thursday afternoon. The announcement framed it as a personal decision. No mention of investigations, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a carefully worded paragraph meant to preserve dignity that had already expired. By Monday, that paragraph didn't matter anymore. Formal findings followed. Revenue classifications reversed. Deferred liabilities surfaced. Internal emails became exhibits. The timeline my father had mapped years earlier matched the facts with unsettling precision. Northbridge paid fines large enough to be remembered. Executives testified under oath. Several faced consequences that could no longer be negotiated away. I watched it all from a distance. Not because I was afraid, but because proximity wasn't necessary anymore. When a federal investigator finally asked if I wanted formal recognition for my role, I declined. I didn't do this to be seen. I said, I did it so it would stop. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my father's apartment one last time. I packed the notebooks carefully, not as evidence, but as legacy. His work hadn't been about punishment. It had been about balance. Before I closed the door, I sat at his desk and wrote a single line in a new notebook. Truth doesn't need force. It needs patience. I didn't go back to corporate life. Instead, I consulted quietly, helping organizations fix what they were too proud to admit was broken. I chose transparency over power, prevention over exposure, sometimes late at night. I think about Lucius Carter not with anger, not even with satisfaction, just with clarity. He told me my emergency wasn't the company's problem. He was right. It was his. And in the end, that made all the difference. There are moments in life that only reveal their true meaning after everything has finally gone quiet. I came to understand that the greatest lesson wasn't in the collapse of a company, but in how people treat one another when power and fear collide. I used to believe that working hard, staying loyal, and silently enduring would eventually be recognized. But the truth is, your worth is never decided in the moment you're dismissed or disrespected. It's decided by how you rise afterward. Losing my father didn't instantly make me stronger. It forced me to slow down, to see more clearly, and to live by what he taught me, do the right thing. Even when no one is applauding, justice doesn't need to be loud. It needs patience and self-respect. If you're still here listening to this, did you stay until the end? I truly hope this story reached you in its own way. After you finish listening, take a few minutes to stand up, open a window, and let natural light into your space. It's a small act, but it can lift your spirit more than you expect. Where are you listening from right now? Which city? Which country? Leave a comment, I'd really love to know. And if this story gave you something to think about or feel, please like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe so we can meet again in the stories to come.